Hi, everyone. We're so thrilled to be kicking off Community Table, our new monthly series focusing on under-discussed issues within the diabetes community and facing both people with type 1 and type 2. I'm Jordan, Director of Programs at Beyond Type 1, and I will hand it off momentarily to an incredible group who's going to be talking about eating disorders and diabetes tonight. And we are so thrilled to be with you. Before we kick it off, I want to thank everyone joining us tonight, whether you're joining us here in the Zoom webinar or joining us on Facebook Live. I also want to thank those who are making tonight possible. Community Table is presented by the JDRF Beyond Type 1 Alliance and made possible with support from Abbott Diabetes Care, Dexcom, Lilly Diabetes, Mankind, Medtronic, Omnipod, Roche Diabetes Care, and Tandem. As a reminder, if you have questions throughout tonight's discussion, we might be able to answer a few, so feel free to drop them in the chat or in the comments on Facebook, and we'll try to get to them. We'll also be making sure we compile any and all resources talked about tonight, so those will be available for you as well. For now, I'm going to ask all our panelists to come on video, and I'll be handing it off to our amazing moderator, Anne. Anne, feel free to take it away.
Hey, hi, everybody. So welcome to Community Table. We're really excited to be here. We're here on behalf of Beyond Type 1, and we'll be talking about eating disorders and diabetes tonight. And we're so excited to get started. If you or someone you love is living with an eating disorder and diabetes, we're glad that you're here tonight, and we're glad that you're going to be able to get questions answered and listen to other people's perspectives. We're representing a variety of perspectives from both type 1 and type 2, from multi-ethnic and multi-gendered approaches, and we can't wait to get started to really have a deep discussion about this issue. We're also able to compile and share a bunch of resources. If you're interested in support networks online, We Are Diabetes and Diabulimia Helpline are both a resource, but we will also include other resources in the chat. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself, and then I'm going to invite other people to introduce themselves. I'm Dr. Ann Goebel-Fabry. I'm a psychologist in private practice currently. I work with a number of people with eating disorders and diabetes, both type 1 and type 2. But I started my career at Joslin Diabetes Center here in Boston, and I worked there for 16 years as both a clinician and a researcher and a teacher and an assistant professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School. And now I'm off on my own, doing my own thing, wrote a book about the subject, and am very interested in hearing people's perspectives tonight. So Mary, how about if you start off and introduce yourself, please?
Hi, everyone. I am Mary. I live an hour outside Atlanta. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes when I was 21 years old. I have a really strong family history, but I was definitely the youngest diagnosed, not something, it's not like a badge of honor that I wear or something, but it's been 21 years now, giving away my age. In terms of eating disorders, I'm very open about my struggle on social media, in my support communities online. I battle binge eating. It's still a big struggle for me. I'm proud to say that the last few years have been years of recovery for me. And I'm very excited about this topic tonight. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Oh, terrific. Thank you, Mary. How about you, Kathleen?
Hi, I'm Kathleen Gordon. I'm the Southeastern Regional Representative from wearediabetes.org. This is a group that will help you find help and support and resources that you need. In my everyday life, I'm a registered dietitian, nutritionist. I'm also a certified diabetes care and education specialist, formerly known as a CDE. We're all familiar with that. And I also am excited about tonight's discussion only because I feel as a clinician that it's very much under discussed. And really, we don't know that much about eating disorders. And I did struggle with an eating disorder myself for quite a long time and went through with Asha Brown at We Are Diabetes to help me to recover. And of course, that's what I'm drawn to now, to help other people get help. I've been a type 1 diabetic now for 38 years. I'm also a mother to a type 1 diabetic. She was diagnosed at 2. And I hope she doesn't also encounter the same struggles that I did. So I'm glad we're getting this out there.
Terrific. How about you, Dr. Vega?
Hello, everyone. My name is Jose Jimenez Vega. I'm a pediatric endocrinologist, and I'm based in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I have a very strong interest in the clinical care of patients with diabetes, both type 1 and type 2. So I consider myself a boots on the ground doc who tries to work as a team with all of our patients and families. And I see every day the challenges and tribulations of diabetes in general, and all the different pushes and stretches in our life and messages that we give them, that a lot of the times gives so much stress, so much pressure, and sometimes can exacerbate all of these challenges. So happy to be part of the team today.
Terrific. Thank you. How about you, Eritrea?
Hi, everyone. I'm Eritrea Musa Khan. I live in Dallas, Texas. I'm born and raised Dallas. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in 2002. So I've had diabetes for almost 18 years now. It's a long time. I'm a content creator at Diabetics Doing Things. You can find us over on Instagram, and we tell the amazing stories of people with diabetes every day. I've struggled with eating disorders and eating disordered eating most of my life, but I was diagnosed formally in 2011. And it's something that is really near and dear to my heart, just because I wish that I wouldn't have struggled for so long. So something about being from such a multicultural background makes me think that if the resources were been available to my family members, that maybe I would have gotten some help sooner. My parents are both immigrants to America. My mom is Mexican, and my dad is from a small country named Eritrea in Africa. So I feel like I've always felt that if we had more resources for those communities, we've been able to help me out and people like me.
An incredibly important point, which we hope to get to very soon. How about you, Taylor?
Hi, I'm Taylor. I'm from Austin, Texas. I grew up in a much, much smaller area in East Texas, a little closer to Eritrea and Dallas. I was diagnosed with type 1 or type 2, actually, when I was 15. And then I was re-diagnosed a few years later. The combination of misdiagnosis, being a teenager, and a lot of other things created a really perfect storm for me to have a really unhealthy relationship with food in my body. So I just wanted to be here today to talk about that, and hopefully to put a face on it that's going to look a little more familiar to some folks.
So we've talked about a bunch of things already. Jose and Kathleen and I will certainly jump in. Can you share what type of eating disorders do you guys see most in the patients with diabetes that you encounter?
I work in a hospital, and so I usually don't get a lot of time with my patients unless I see them as an outpatient. But as far as eating disorders, I see quite a combination of all of them. Not only the anorexia with the type 1, where we just have the wrong information. There's not enough information from clinicians that they have been seeing to really appropriately deal with their diabetes. They're stressed about how much do they weigh. They have to count every carb that goes in their mouth, just an overemphasis of that. So not only food deprivation, but also overeating. I see that quite often as well. Overeating at nighttime, binge eating.
I agree completely with Kathleen. I see a combination of everything. I think from the get-go, one of the first things that ingrains in my head is that during the unfortunate time of the new diagnosis of a patient with diabetes, the parents will say, my child won't be able to eat anything, or will have to go into a diet. I mean, from the get-go, there's already that pressure being put on the child that they can't eat, they can't do these things. And it's like that seed that it gets planted in the heads of the parents, unfortunately. And, we try to take it away, but as time goes by, it kind of starts growing. And, then it also depends on the age that they were diagnosed. It's more challenging, if you have a teenager where they were used of, eating whatever they wanted, and now they have to be on the lookout of, what it is, what is not, counting the carbs. And then, we're not even going into the parts of the having a low, and then now they go and, binge and, have that, binge attack because they're low and they're just trying to eat all that food and they're like, oh my gosh, I just ate all this. So, and then they get that remorse. So it's all these factors that cascade, and sometimes it's a hodgepodge of things that combine together that even worsen things.
I think the problem is when we actually do a literature search, like if we were to just do a Google search straight up and look at eating disorders and type 1 diabetes, and I always use those terms, eating disorders and diabetes, either type 1 or type 2, as opposed to diabulimia. If we just looked up diabulimia, it would exclusively be around the issue of insulin restriction in type 1 diabetes. And what we know is that we know women, because this has been the nature of the research, women with diabetes are 2.5 times more likely to develop an eating disorder of any kind than their same age peers who don't have diabetes, either type 1 or type 2. And that either includes an eating disorder that may or may not have anything to do with insulin restriction. It may be straight up food restriction with appropriate insulin administration. It may be binging and purging. It may be binging and not purging. It could be who knows what. And depending on type 1 versus type 2, there's such an array of possibilities for an eating disorder to take hold that we're really talking about a multiplicity of different problems all under the same umbrella. And I think the biggest difficulty comes because we tend to think of, and this is a fault of the research as well as the media, we tend to think of an eating disorder means an exceptionally skinny, rich, white girl, as opposed to a person of any size, of any color, of any socioeconomic status or ethnic status. And any of these things might be taking hold. And I think we need to sort of really open our eyes to the fact that there's not a particular look that should alert us to this issue. This is about the way that eating disorders behavior shrink people's lives and shrink people's focus to exclusively hone in on food, calories, exercise, and body size. And the way that eating disorders take hold of the full range of quality of life. That's an equal opportunity phenomenon. And I think we need to be alert to that. And I'd love to hear from Mary, from Taylor, from Eritrea, from Kathleen about your experiences, because I know you all have rich lived experiences of this very, very issue.
So I spoke a little bit in my introduction about binge eating. I've never been formally diagnosed. I am self-diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
I have done a lot of self-improvement, I guess. I started Sugar Mama Strong, you can see in my name here, 4.5 years ago. I needed support with my diabetes journey, and I didn't particularly love the communities that I found on Facebook, and so I started my own group. That's how the community was born. And through that community, I realized that I was not alone with my behaviors, with my feelings, and it was like this whole world was opened up for me in terms of the emotional side of diabetes.
So I'm going to dive in here for a second, Mary, because something was obviously missing from the online communities that you
for me
took in. So what was missing, and what does Sugar Mama Strong, what's the niche that it's expanding? Because it's important.
So what I needed was positivity and support and love. And you're going to make me cry. I'm not going to cry in front of whoever's watching. I didn't need food police. I didn't need someone to tell me that I was doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I do that enough to myself.
Yeah.
As a woman and a perfectionist and food issues and all of that stuff, I didn't need strangers online telling me not to eat a tortilla. You know what I'm saying? I didn't want any of that. And I got kicked out of a group for like telling someone the wrong thing. And it was just enough of the negativity. Like I just couldn't do it. And so for me, I just wanted a positive space. I wanted somewhere where I visited that I was going to feel better when I left, not worse. And so that was what was missing for me.
Yeah.
And so I built it myself. And some of the ladies I know are watching. I saw their names in the little participants
fantastic.
area. So that made me smile.
Cool.
But knowing that I wasn't alone in that eating struggle, I would say our group, we're about 5,000 women. I would say the bulk are living with type 2. We do have caregivers. We do have members living with type 1, 1.5, gestational. We have all walks of life. I would say the bulk of the type 2 women have food issues. I call it food baggage of some sort, you know, whether it's emotional eating, nighttime eating, overeating, binge eating, because I post about it, my struggle a lot. And they're like, me too, me too, me too. It's not an uncommon thing. And so, you know, it's an important topic because I feel like, and I don't want to go off the agenda, but I feel like so often online people say, well, if you have type 2 diabetes, just do this. And it's like, if I could just do this, I would have done it already. It's been 21 years. Yeah. Don't you think if I could just do it, I would have? I am a whole person. I am not just type 2 diabetes. And so I think from the medical perspective and the social media perspective and the well-meaning family member perspective, all of that, we need to remember that we're people first before our diagnosis. And so, you know, saying just do anything is not real helpful.
Too reductionistic. Taylor, how about you? You had some really had an interesting take on things when we spoke earlier this week.
So being diagnosed as a type 2 as a teenager was awful. I will always tell people that if I had to choose between the two, I would much rather be a type 1 any day, just because of the way people treat people with type 2 diabetes. It's disgusting.
Can you expand on that, please? Because that's important. Explain what you mean.
Yeah, so it's very similar to what Mary was talking about. People assume that if you're not overweight currently, they're like, oh, so you used to be really, really, really big, right? Or, oh, your parents must have like given you a lot of crap as a kid. You didn't exercise. It was
much sugar.
Yeah, you eat that. And it's like, even other diabetics, especially like type 1s, were like, well, I can't do anything about mine. You could, like she was saying, you could just exercise. Yeah, you could just stop eating.
Yeah.
And I'm okay. Yeah, so you get that from people within communities and just random people. I got it a lot from my pediatric endocrinologist. She was very set on me being a type 2 because I do have some family history of type 2. But she was, I'll never forget my second appointment with her. Walked in, stepped on the scale, and her words to me were, oh, you gained 5 pounds since you were here last. That needs to stop. And so of course it didn't, because finally I was like actually taking care of diabetes and things like that. So I kept gaining weight, and every single appointment, it was just a dressing down about my weight, being lazy. I had to be sneaking food, et cetera, et cetera. And that went on for far longer than it should have. Probably a year and a half. I think it was almost 2 years before I started taking insulin. And I felt terrible. I had to have looked like a zombie. It was pretty awful, which really is what set me up for a future of once I finally got insulin, I was like, I don't want to take it. That means I'm lazy, right? So yeah.
I think for me, I grew up a lot in the Latino culture. My family and I spent summers in Mexico. I speak Spanish. My mom is Mexican. We're from San Luis. So with that, I come from a background where the bigger bodies are celebrated within our families, but in our media and in our culture and our representation, it's very much a thin white aesthetic that is being chased, even like in our telenovelas and things like that. So for a long time in my childhood, even because I was diagnosed as an 8-year-old with type 1, I struggled with the way that I ate and food and control and things like that. And there was some time where I was heavy and my family didn't relate to that in a good way. It was very much like, why are you heavy? This is a problem. It's a problem that you need to solve. And then later in life, when I did develop a much more serious eating disorder, it was almost something that was celebrated because I lost all this weight and it was an achievement, you know? And I feel like in our culture, there's not really an understanding that food is fuel, not just what like you put into your body to be a certain weight. So it's always been really important to me to get more of an understanding out there in my own community that it's okay to be whatever weight you are. Your body can do amazing things no matter what size you are.
So important what you're describing, not only just the cultural body ideal, but also the overarching assumption that weight loss equals health and weight gain equals lack of health. I remember being back in the real world days when I still had an office. I remember being in the basement of my office building and at the soda machine getting a soda, and some random fellow coworker chose to tell me that she had recently lost a lot of weight, and I didn't know her from Adam. And I looked at her and I said, "Oh, well, is that a good thing?" And she looked at me like I had 12 heads. Like the assumption, of course, is it's a good thing, as opposed to she might have metastatic cancer or be on chemotherapy or be on the edge of DKA or who knows what. You know, people who have had diabetes and who have used their blood glucose as a way of calorie purging know just how physically damaging that experience is, and yet how the culture is still feeding you these positive feedback statements. Oh, you look so great. Look at you. You've lost weight. How have you done it, Taylor? Oh, Eritrea, look at you. Fabulous. And it could mean you're on the brink of being admitted to the intensive care unit.
Yeah, meanwhile, you're going crazy, but you only weigh 100 pounds. Like it is an intense way to look at health.
And it has no bearing, genuinely.
Sure, I felt the media also. I felt the media for this a lot as well. Diabetes, first and foremost, has always been known as the fat person's disease, type 1 or type 2 or gestate, whichever one you have. It's the fat person's disease. So I think there's already that negative connotation on it from the start of diagnosis or just the word diabetes itself. And so look at the jokes that are out there and on Facebook. You see it all the time. You know, if so-and-so had 12 candy bars and they ate 8 of them, what do they have now? Oh, they have diabetes. These jokes are not funny, and they're ignorance. They spread ignorance, and it's upsetting. It really is.
Dr. Jimenez Vega, when you deal with your families with newly diagnosed patients with either type 1 or type 2, how do you try to sort of orient them around this issue of needing insulin and needing to monitor carbs, and in such a way that it doesn't turn into a food police situation?
That's a great question, and it's challenging. I'm not saying that what we do is perfect, you know.
It's very delicate. Yeah,
it's very delicate balance, because first we're trying to provide all this massive amount of education and about, especially when we have patients that we're starting on insulin, and we're trying to explain the different insulins and trying to explain the terminology and, you know, the calculations and all this information. And it's this information overload that we are, you know, dumping on our families and our patients. But for me, one of the most important things is the communication and the trust with my patients and their families. And so every time that I talk with them, I say, okay, you know, I'm giving you an open book, and this is a blank book that we're writing together. And it's not about me, or against you. We're working as a team. We win together, we lose together. So this is not that you come to clinic and say, oh, you know what? I got an A1C of 5. And I will say, oh, it was all my effort. No, it was their effort. I only spent, 30 to 40 minutes of the time. They did all of it on their own. And if they had an A1C of over 14, it was the same. We need to work and see. And, a lot of the times, for me, the challenging part is when I tell them, what can I do for you? How can I help you? And I feel like a lot of the times that catches them off guard, and they feel like they're blocked and they're shunned, and they don't want to say and what they want at that time. And that's, for me, the most important thing, because we need to tailor their approach to each patient and each family. Each one will have different sensitivities. They will have different cultural ideas. They will have different foods, different ideas of their body shape. I always say that we all come in different colors, shapes, sizes, and accents. And so therefore we need to understand all those things. But it's always for me, the challenging part is, how do we click with our patients to get to that point that we have that open communication? I might say things that they might say to me, no, I'm not in agreement with this. And that's totally fine. But if we can in the end come to a common ground and say, we're going to try this, and then we're going to move and try this other thing, and then go to another step, that's totally fine. That's part, diabetes is a science, but it's an art. Yes. And that's the beauty of, or the terrible thing about diabetes. We need to understand it as this. This is not a cooking book. This is not a recipe book. We need to adjust to each one of our patients and family.
I think that's so important. I think I try to encourage people to think about, even, when we give people algorithms like, what's your carbohydrate ratio, insulin to carb ratio, that makes it seem like now we have something very precise and mathematical. And actually what we have is like a rule of thumb. We're just trying to do the best we can. It's very sophisticated. It's sophisticated enough. It's never going to be as sophisticated as a human pancreas, but it's damn good. And it's good enough. And we have to sort of deal with the error around that and accept that the error around that is still good enough. And I think that's very hard to do when we're talking about numbers, when we tend to think of numbers as being very precise. And I think that goes for A1C, that goes for blood glucose, that goes for numbers on the scale too. And that goes for numbers on the back of people's pants. They all seem very precise to people. I'm interested in hearing people's take also on this issue of different body image ideals among different cultures, because I think there's this sort of like meta media culture, which is sort of like Facebook and Instagram and all of that stuff, and then there's the individual media culture, like Eritrea, I think you talked about Telemundo, and different cultures. I know myself, meeting with a patient, I loved this experience. She was a woman from the Caribbean who had developed type 2, had always been exceptionally thin as a girl living in the Caribbean, came to the US as a young adult and instantly lived a more sedentary life and gained weight and developed type 2 diabetes, but was so thrilled because she finally had curves and she finally felt sexy. And here I was, this health psychologist, trying to talk to her about the benefits of weight loss. And I was not talking to her about like restrictive dieting by any means, but just about like getting herself to a slightly healthier weight zone. And she looked at me and she goes, "Oh, honey, no offense, but I don't want to look like you." And I said, "No problem. I'm good with that. Don't worry about it." It's not about that. It's about feeling comfortable and healthy and sexy and at ease within your own self. And how do we find that?
I think it's interesting that you said that she felt sexy that way, because she quite literally was like, "I don't want your situation. Like, I'm good where I am at." And I think that because I come from different, because I come from different communities, though, I will say that it is always thinness that is coveted. It seems like it's always like at the end of the day, as much as we put our Lizzos out there and our Adeles and our, I'm trying to think of a larger Hispanic woman that we put out there.
Adele is now coveted for being thinner.
Exactly. Although we put them out there and we try to glorify this idea of like being conscious that weight is not health, we still continue to still replicate the same role models that we have for young women every day, which is a very thin, light-skinned, whether she's Latina, Arab, Black, Pakistani, wherever we're talking about, it's always going to be somebody light. And it's frustrating. And I don't understand why to give birth, if you see a girl with big hips in the Latino community, you're like, yes, this, you know, your body was made for this, to be a mom. But if you see that on a cover of a magazine, then it's not. And I've never understood why within our own community, in our own small circles, we say one thing and then we portray a completely different photograph of what reality really is, because what we're coveting, what we're chasing is not real. So there's always that.
Right.
It's super frustrating though, because when you talk about Lizzo, when you talk about Beyonce and things like that, it's fetishization. Like, it's not, Black women don't actually meet anyone's beauty standards. It's either I'm not paying attention to you at all, you're hypermasculine, or you're hypersexualized. And there's no kind of respectable beauty standard to be as dark as I am. And I'm not the darkest person I know. And so for me, you just like yo-yo between both constantly. And no matter what community I move between, you don't fit. So like, I'm sure like my body shape is fine. My family was always, never had any issues with it. But the second I step into a doctor's office, my weight is a problem. The second I kind of engage with other diabetics, because this is a community, we do have a set of beauty standards and I don't fit here either. So I think it's they're hard worlds to move between, because it is, like Eritrea was saying, it's always thinness, it's always whiteness. No matter what the message is, that is always the image.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're raising really important ideas. I think we also talked earlier about the group that's also missing in this discussion, which is men. And I think we need to talk a little bit about that. And in the research in eating disorders, I always say eating disorders in general, as opposed to eating disorders in diabetes. I haven't figured out like a more graceful way of demarcating those two communities. So in terms of the eating disorders, generally speaking, there's been a lack of attention to men, and similarly in diabetes as well. And most recently, we are starting to include men in our research, and I think that's important. But what we're realizing is the body ideal is different, and the way that the eating behaviors and pressure manifests itself is also different. So for some people, that involves, you know, a sort of more muscular, overarching body ideal, and for some people that's more naturally attained, and for others that's harder to attain. I mean, we all come with our own genetics in terms of how our families look, and you know, when that woman from the Caribbean said that to me, I flashed back immediately to like 3 generations in my family of men and women who are all built exactly like I am. And it's just like, okay, here we are. I'm German. This is what I look like. But you know, it's I know this stuff has a huge emotional valence to people.
Do you think a lot of the reason for not having men brought more to the surface on this is that they're just not, I mean, for women, it's difficult to get ladies to admit that they are omitting insulin or that they are having issues with food. So do you think that for men, it's even more so? And maybe we're just not seeing the statistics because no one is saying anything about it. And it's just, maybe it's considered really demasculating. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you're raising an important point. I think first and foremost, people weren't asking. I mean, it's the same, the history of eating disorders research is that we started out looking at very white, upper middle class teenage samples of girls. And then gradually the age range broadened and the diversity broadened and the socioeconomic status broadened. And eventually now we've caught up to, gee, maybe we need to also include men. And that's important too. And so now we're asking, thankfully, asking everybody. But it's only in doing so that now we can have the opportunity to learn. And I think that's important.
Also, men who kind of struggle with being praised some of those behaviors that aren't so healthy. Because when I think about my male friends who do struggle, they're super, like, they're weightlifters, they're super duper buff. And even though it's excessive, they're praised. Like, no one ever asked them, is this something that it's a little too much? What are you eating? Like, how stressed out are you if you can't stick to a schedule and that kind of thing? It's because they look like the ideal, I guess, like big muscles and ready to go. No one questions how they got there.
Well, and I think that's important because one of the questions that that we thought about discussing was also like, so how do we know when to be alerted to be concerned about people? And how do we know when to ask about, gee, this seems like maybe it's going in the wrong direction? And I think the biggest problem is to assume that it has to, that the red flag needs to be either an A1C or a weight or a body size. I think there's much more subtlety to that. And we can miss things so readily if we, I mean, I'm thinking about somebody who I spoke with today, who's a person who, you know, is still in a presumably healthy body mass index and doing just fine, but has a history of an eating disorder and is finding herself with the pressure of the pandemic, having her first binge purge episode that she's had in 10 years. And there's nothing, like, if you looked at her and just sort of spotted her on the street, there's nothing about her that would draw any kind of red flag, but she knows that this is a slippery slope. And she knows the pain that's associated with the potential for that.
I know for me, looking, if I hadn't have been through an eating disorder with mine, I don't think I would be able to recognize the signs as clearly as I do. And looking for, do they do their site changes? Does their A1C stay high? They know all the right things to do, but they're not quite doing it. A lot of times I see it with being almost orthorexic. They're going to such an extreme with the foods that they choose to put in their mouth, not put in their mouth, why they aren't, the excuses that they have for not doing it. And I had the same excuses, exact same. Oh, I'm trying veganism, and oh, I'm intermittently fasting, and oh, I'm doing this no carb, low carb thing. And it made me also feel very powerful. I had powerful feelings around food that if I didn't eat for days at a time, then I was accomplishing a goal. I felt powerful by doing this. In fact, I felt most at home on the days. I felt very comforted by the fact that I could live in this world and I had control over this. And if I didn't know the questions to ask only because I'd been through it, I think I would miss a lot of the signs. And that's why I say clinicians really need to be educated on this, because even when I was studying for my my CDCES exam, there were 3 slides, literally 3 slides out of the hundreds we were studying on eating disorders and diabetes, which I found extremely unfortunate.
I totally agree. I mean, it's a combination of things. You know, I think one thing that also is helping now is the standardization or increased frequency of the screening for depression and anxiety disorders in our kids. I think that is a good start of seeing, even if the scores are not high or concerning, you know, there might be some flags in there, some red flags that might make you converse and say, okay, I noticed that you checked this one being a little bit high. What's going on here? And that can be, you know, the entrance to that patient to open up and explain some of the things that then will raise more flags for you. I think also the involvement of the dietitians. I think they're a fantastic part of our team, and they need to be closely involved with our patients to review a lot of their diet and, you know, provide that professional support, not only for them, but for us, the providers, who sometimes, you know, we're overwhelmed with the patient loads and patient things, and we're moving so fast that sometimes we might miss those situations. And it's not that we're ignoring the patient, it's just, you know, that there is a certain time, a certain move, you know, that we have to continue to move and go on. And so therefore, you know, they're fantastic. And of course, you know, the support for all of our diabetes educators and that connection to families also is fundamental, you know, because then sometimes you know, I will get information from my diabetes educator that would say, Jose, this is going on. I don't even have to ask the question. They already have opened the path for me, and they let me just, you know, walk through that same path that they already know. So it's a multidisciplinary team-based approach that we need to work each time that we're seeing our patients. It's not, I think that the most important thing is, no matter the A1C, no matter the compliance, no matter everything, we need to ask about all of these questions and not just assume that everything is perfect.
I'm glad you said that. I'm sorry, I'm glad you said that, because how many times do you see doctors that write non-compliant next to their patients and just let it go, not taking the time to get involved? Yeah.
So I want to ask Mary, Taylor, and Eritrea, and also you, Kathleen, if you can imagine the types of questions that you wish providers would have asked you that might have opened up the door. Because I think that medical folks feel really awkward knowing how to engage in this stuff. And I know personally the teams that I've worked with have been concerned if they ask about, specifically if they ask about insulin restriction, they don't want to sort of like accidentally teach this as a symptom. And I don't think that's much of a risk, but I understand the sensitivity to that. And I'd love to hear from you guys what you think would have been a helpful way to engage you in your own care. Mary, I'm going to put you on the spot.
That's fine.
Okay.
The first 10 years of my type 2 diagnosis, I did nothing.
Okay.
I was the non-compliant patient, and I was also 300 pounds. So I was the stereotypical type 2 woman. I skipped doctor's appointments. I put off blood work. I did all of those things. And when I did go to the doctor, I actually had a doctor tell me that they were going to drop me as a patient because I wasn't doing what he was telling me to do. And that for me was the worst thing he could have done, because it was so
shaming.
Yes, it was like, well, now I'm definitely not coming back, you know, because I was so embarrassed. You know, my blood work came back, my cholesterol was really high, and my A1C, of course, was high. And I got like a lecture and scolded like a child instead of, okay, like here, problem solving. And for me, if it was like a discussion, like we're partners, like, you know, the doctor said earlier, you know, we're a team, like we're in this together. If it were that kind of approach, I feel like if he had said, what's going on? Like, and I felt like he actually wanted to know, instead of it was just like, okay, I have another patient in 5 minutes, like we got to get you out of here. I feel like it could have made a difference. Maybe it wouldn't have taken me 10 years to do something. You know, I've lost 100 pounds now. Obviously, I'm out of that denial phase of my life. And, you know, I'm helping other people too. And so you know, all these experiences happen for a reason. You know, if you had told me that back then, I probably would have rolled my eyes at you. But I think having a partnership and asking, having a genuine conversation. It's not so much about what questions you ask necessarily,
The
it's
tone,
how
the
you
tone.
ask them
Mm-hmm.
and the time that you take. And, you know, when I go to the doctor now, I've never, in the last 8 years, since I found my new doctor, my new care provider, I've never missed an appointment because I look forward to talking to her about what's going on. And so it's a whole different experience for me, not because of what she says, but because of how she says it. I mean, she's not easy on me when things aren't great, but she does it in a way where I know she genuinely cares about the outcome, you know? So, I mean, yes, this is a sensitive topic, but it's more in how the intention behind it, not necessarily the word.
I think what
Does
you're
that make
saying,
sense?
yeah, absolutely. You're talking about being treated as an equal partner in the discussion,
Right.
and being treated with mutual respect.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think it's really common, and I can't speak for those of you living with type 1, but in the type 2 community, there's a lot of shame associated with our diagnosis. And so when we go to the doctor, we feel like we have to sit there like this and just take it.
Mm-hmm.
And we just sit there and we listen and we don't speak up because we don't feel like we deserve to have a voice because we did this to ourselves and we're fat and lazy and whatever. I, of course, don't feel like that anymore. It took me a long time to get there, but initially a lot of people feel that way. And so we just sit there and take it. And so it's unfortunate.
Taylor, how about you? What do you think would be a way that you wish that healthcare providers had tried to engage with you around this issue?
I think mental health in general needs to be more of an in-front conversation with diabetes care. I was an anxious kid. I'm an anxious adult. In that period of misdiagnosis, I was in and out of the ER for panic attacks that no one would call panic attacks, but I now know very well that they were panic attacks. So there was very clearly something going on with me. So I think mental health, just talking to people and not making them feel, as Mary was saying, so ashamed. Because I internalized everything that endocrinologist said, and 13 years later on bad days, I can still hear that voice. So conversations, mental health as a whole, because there are a lot of things that go into this and needing control of different things. And I think I desperately wanted control of something.
Absolutely.
And that's where so many things stemmed from.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. Artreya, what about you?
I think for me as a child, there just wasn't that many conversations around food with my endocrinologist and with a dietitian. I'm a product of Children's Dallas, which is one of the best endocrinology programs in the country. And yet I wasn't diagnosed with my eating disorder until I was an adult. I wasn't diagnosed with a lot of my health problems until I was an adult. It took a lot of me looking inward to try to figure out what was going on with myself to try to figure it out. So I don't think that
What do you think they were missing, and what do you think they could have looked at, could have noticed?
I think that there is a bias that comes when you come from a family where someone doesn't speak English and where you look the way that I look and where you have multiple siblings and working class parents, and the resources just aren't as available to you because they're scheduled on days that your mom has to work or that you have to go to school, and they're all in English and none of the paperwork's in Spanish and you're filling out everything for your mom. So I think that there was a big disconnect for me. And even though my doctor was really, really sweet, he's not a bad person. He just didn't give me what I needed. It took me a long time to find out I have celiac disease. So it's just, there's all of these issues within my own gut, stomach, eating disorder, all linked to one another that I felt a doctor should have figured out. But because I didn't have a doctor speak to me or actually ask me what was going on or whatever, I didn't get that care. To answer the specific question though, I don't think that I think that when you're a child, you believe that you're invincible. And then you have to be hit with the hard realities of reality. Like, this is the truth. And it took being an adult and being in DK at a not so nice hospital, Parkland Hospital in Dallas, and seeing like actual homeless people who have diabetes and their kinds of struggles, because when you don't have access to supplies and you have bad diabetes care, not because you have an eating disorder, but because you don't have access to those resources, there are huge repercussions and consequences to that, like amputations and retinopathy and dialysis. And I had an old lady talk to me, an older Black woman, and she was like, baby, you don't want to be like me. And I swear to God, this is what scared me straight. And I hate to think that there has to be consequences in life for people to learn. But I think maybe if somebody would have grabbed me by the hand and walked me up to the 7th floor of that hospital and said, hey, this is the diabetes floor, and this is where we take all the patients with diabetes who are non-compliant, and we cut their feet off and they can't see and they got to go to dialysis. Maybe that would have been a bit of an education moment. But I just don't think that the realities of how harsh life and diabetes can be were very real to me as a child.
I also had the luck when I was at Joslin to hear the autobiography of a guy who had lived 70 years with type 1 diabetes, and at age 12 was brought up to just that floor. He was diagnosed and was brought to that floor to look at the amputations and the dialysis and everything else. And from age 12, changed his career path from what he thought was going to be a medical career to a life insurance sales career, because he didn't think he had the time. So I'm not in favor of the scared straight, but that's just my own bias.
No, like I said, I wish it wasn't a real thing. Like, I wish that there wasn't real life consequences to bad everyday decisions, but
I know.
It is what it is.
Yeah, and I think that's hard as clinicians. I'm sure Dr. Jimenez Vega agrees with me. It's very difficult because I find myself needing to have those kinds of very difficult discussions with patients who, of course, are at risk of death because of DKA, and of course are at risk of dialysis, amputations, retinopathy, etc. I have to have those conversations, but I have to have them in a way that doesn't shut down communication altogether and that isn't a threat. And it's very difficult. God only knows how to do that. I think we skirt a very fine line. Dr. Jimenez Vega, I just wanted to include you in this because I know that one of the things you asked about was, did we have Spanish speaking information? And to Eritrea's point, we do. And I'm so relieved to be able to say that. We have some information written in Spanish about eating disorders and diabetes, and that will be available to people. But I wanted you to have just a little bit of a last word, if you will, about your experience with your own patients.
I agree with Eritrea. And for me, is that fine balance of, kids feeling invincible at the same time of balancing the scare tactics. And a lot of the times I have the parents come in with this scare tactics right away. And I'm like, whoa, chill. We need to talk about what's going on first. And then, the scare tactics are not going to affect them right now. They're going to feel invincible. And in all honesty, fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of the times those complications don't happen until they're in their mid-20s or early 30s. So they don't see it as the pediatric endocrinologist. We don't see it. And so they're like, well, I've been like 10 years not taking care of this. So why is that going to change, And so, and so then I don't try to take that approach. And I just say, okay, let's work with this because, we're trying to give you the tools so that things will be better for the future and you will avoid these situations. But I don't want to scare you with this because you're a grown-up or you're going to be a grown-up and you're going to be dealing with this. So it's a balance. It's challenging, and again, it's not a cookie cutter model. And, we have to understand what are their fears, what are not their fears, some their aspirations about school, sports, careers, things like that. Sometimes that might be a better catapult for a motivation for them than going into the scary pathway, and saying, like before, kids couldn't be a pilot, so they would be completely disappointed. But now you're like, hey, by the way, now you can be a pilot, but you have to take good care of your diabetes. So they're like, oh, really? Cool. Now I can work really hard, take care of my diabetes, show that I have stable control. And then that's a motivation. And we're not putting any pressures on eating, on exercise, on body shaming, on anything else or complications long term. They're just focusing on their aspirations like any kid that would not have diabetes. And that's the part that in the end, I feel that is the most important thing. Yes, they have diabetes, but diabetes should not define you. You need to move away from that diabetes and move forward.
Yeah, I have to say, when I was interviewing women for the book that I wrote, I was looking at women who had recovered from restricting insulin as their primary eating disorder symptom in type 1 diabetes. And one of the women said, and I'll never forget this because I heard it from so many patients day to day, you never know how bad you really were feeling until you feel better. Because it's not so much the issue of down the road, you may feel bad. It's the issue of right now, when your blood sugar is 300, 400 plus, and you're feeling awful, you could feel better. You could be on the basketball court. You could be focusing in AP bio. You could be performing in, Aladdin. You could be doing whatever is most important to you. And you don't realize that you're walking around feeling like you're living in mud, like you're knee deep in mud, and living the quality of life of a 95-year-old when you're a young adult. I always say to my patients, you deserve to feel your age, and you're not feeling your age. And I think the more immediate rewards of wellness is what we need to help focus on, because they're real. And these down the line issues are very significant, of course, but they're still down the line. And the immediate is what's actually the reward right now. And I think that's true with type 1 and type 2 when it's well managed. So, all right, maybe that's going to be the last word. I'm sorry if I just capitalized on that. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I'm going to kick it back to Jordan to help close us out. Jordan?
Awesome. Thank you, Anne. And thank you all for sharing. That was an incredible panel, and we all really appreciate you being so candid and giving us so much. Thank you to all of you who joined us, whether you were in Zoom webinar or on Facebook. And of course, thank you again to those who made tonight possible. Community Table is presented by the JDRF Beyond Type 1 Alliance and made possible with support from Abbott Diabetes Care, Dexcom, Lilly Diabetes, Mankind, Medtronic, Omnipod, Roche Diabetes Care, and Tandem. So we're going to have a lot more conversations for you this year. This is just the first of our Community Table series, but we're so excited to keep going with these and featuring incredible groups like this one tonight. Thank you all again, and we hope to see you guys soon.